Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our 13th webinar session this evening. To make a start, I will start by introducing our special guest speaker for today, Mr. Pratyush Sharma. Mr. Pratyush Sharma, he is a doctoral candidate at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica and a recipient of the Canadian Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Scholarship. Mr. Sharma has 6 years of policy experience at Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, which is known as RIS, an autonomous think tank under the Ministry of External Affairs of Government of India in New Delhi. He has a background in international relations with his research areas being development cooperation and South-South cooperation. He has been part of the research academic teams at RIS, which has constantly provided the policy inputs to the government of India on issues related to development cooperation and South-South cooperation. Has also been a global governance fellow at the German Development Institute in Bonn. Mr. Sharma is the associate editor of the Development Cooperation Review. And I hope that you will give us some insights about RIS and the Development Cooperation Review in between in his talk or at the end in the Q&A discussion. So today he will be sharing with us his expert opinion on South-South cooperation and the right to development. With that, I ask you all please to give your full attention to Mr. Sharma, and after this we'll have a Q&A section for open discussion. So, Mr. Pratyush.
Thank you, Professor, for the introduction, and thank you to the Jindal Center for Global South, and specifically to you for giving me this opportunity to present my research on the topic that I like. You know, I have spent a lot of time with South-South cooperation. And over the last 1.5 years, I have tried to include right to development as well. And I'm trying to see South-South cooperation through the normative framework of right to development. Going to the presentation, let you go through the flow of the presentation. I would be starting with a brief historical origins of South-South cooperation. Then what is the current state of South-South cooperation in the era of SDGs and Agenda 2030? What are the inherent challenges within the South-South cooperation? I mean, though it has been said to be a unique and an alternate or a complementary means of implementation for achieving SDGs, but then there are certain challenges within South-South cooperation as well. And then I'm going to introduce the concept of right to development. What are the key features of right to development, and how right to development can be integrated into the understanding of South-South cooperation. And of course, in the presentation, you're going to see that there are already some mutual infatuation towards each other in terms of its principles and its normative framework. And then we are going to see what is the way forward, how right to development has moved along, what is its present situation, and how do we see it in future. So one of the primary reasons for me as to why I took up this topic for my doctoral research was the time that I spent at RIS, the think tank where I used to work. So I used to work on the research on the issues of South-South cooperation, but the constant struggle or the constant thing that we tried to achieve at RIS during my tenure was, how to theorize South-South cooperation or how to bring that normative framework to South-South cooperation. So that was one of the prime reasons why I took up this research. And through the presentation, you're going to see that, specifically through the challenges in South-South cooperation as to why normative framework or theoretical construct to South-South cooperation is very important. So can all of you hear me properly? Is it fine?
Yes,
So
I
yes,
am getting your voice clear.
Okay, thank you. So just briefly seeing the origins of South-South cooperation, after 1945, after the Second World War, there was a certain group of countries which dominated the arena of international relations, international affairs, and international organizations. They ideated and they came up with international organizations. They instituted them, and all the way it was instituted and all the ways how they were operationalizing their activities were from a very certain narrow perspective, and that perspective was you can say global north, but I would say it was basically the countries that won the Second World War. So in literature it has been called as victor's justice, though the word victor's justice is more associated with the tribunals that took place after the Second World War, the war tribunals, but the similar thing can be seen in the institutions that were instituted after the Second World War. When it came to development, North-South cooperation, which is also known as, development aid. So North-South cooperation started with the Marshall Plan, and its single point agenda was the reconstruction of Europe. And then development aid spread to the global south, so to Asia, to Africa, to countries in Latin America. The development aids, it got spread. And if you see literature, you would realize that development aid had a dual purpose. On one side, or at one hand, they were trying to say the development aid is important for, of course, development. But one of the other reasons was that the global north, or the first world as it was known during that time, they wanted to stop the spread of communism. There is ample amount of literature which says that the single point agenda of development aid was to stop the spread of communism during the Cold War. But as these development aid was flowing in a north-south manner, South suffered from the conditionalities that were imposed on the global South by these countries. There are lots and lots of examples through which one can drive home this point. But I would like to concentrate on two examples. That was the PL 480 wheat incident. So, and this is specifically to India. So during 1950s and 60s, just before the Green Revolution, India was dependent on food aid from a lot of countries, and specifically United States of America. And the public law 480 allowed, the transfer of wheat to India by the US. But in 1960s, late 50s and early 60s, it was also the onset of the Vietnam War. And like many other countries, Indian government, it decried and it said that what US is doing in Vietnam is wrong, and they were against Vietnam War. And, hearing those statements, US just decided to stop the food aid coming to India. So this was one of the conditionalities, and we'll later see how these political conditionalities and also macroeconomic conditionalities have played havoc in the countries of the global south, where the aid, the food aid or financial aid would be stopped because the provider country didn't like some of the statements or the stance or the stand that those countries or the recipient countries took. So that has been a problem all along when it comes to North-South cooperation. Tazara is another example. So Tazara is a railway line between Tanzania and Zambia. So when these countries achieved their independence in late 60s, they wanted to have a railway line connecting, specifically Zambia wanted a railway line connecting Zambia to Tanzania and at the port of Dar es Salaam. But when they went to the Bretton Woods institutions, specifically the World Bank, to get a loan for the construction of the railway, it was denied, saying that these countries have a left bent, and they are almost in the kitty of the communist regime of the Soviet Union. So we won't allow you the aid the financial aid for the construction of the railway line. Of course, this was not said publicly, but that was understood to be the inherent reasons. The official reason or the actual reason they gave was that the project is not financially viable. And then these two countries, went to China to get that railway constructed. So in 1975, the Chinese government provided aid, which in present times is close to, I think, $2 billion. They gave the financial aid for the construction of that railway. And so, with this experience, South-South cooperation. So one thing I want to say that South-South cooperation has always existed. Like for India's case, even before India's independence, like in 1946, a certain group of researchers or the students from other Asian countries came to New Delhi for the, I would say, capacity building programs. And over the years, it has existed, and then it has increased in its quantum and in its geographical spread. But especially during 1960s and 70s, when not only India, but other countries of the South, they realized that how conditionalities are a big problem when it comes to their developmental achievements or the things that they want to have in their own countries. So they decided that, okay, we already have this South-South cooperation, so we need to make sure that it is solidarity-driven, and it should not have any conditionalities attached to it. So the idea was the problems that we are facing in our own development due to North-South cooperation, we shouldn't be putting same conditions, or we shouldn't be causing similar problems to the other developing countries. So this led to certain operational principles of South-South cooperation. To start with, it has to be demand-driven. Now, this point is very important. I mean, again, in literature, there are lots of instances, lots of case studies, lots of examples which says that why demand-driven development cooperation is important. I'll give you just one small example. There is a TED talk by Ernesto Ciroli, who is an Italian aid worker. So he gave this example that how a group of Italian aid workers went to Zambia, and they did the soil testing there, and with their scientists and with their other aid workers, and they realized that the soil is so fertile that anything and everything can grow on this fertile land. And their conclusion was, but the African, the African farmers are lazy. They don't want to work. That is why they are food deficient. And then they came, they started growing fruits and vegetables there. And to their, it was not a surprise because they had done those soil testing. So they realized that the tomatoes, which would grow to a normal size anywhere else in the world, they were growing to a far bigger size. And also other vegetables and the other fruits, they were growing quite well and without any problem. And just as the time came for the harvesting of those fruits and vegetables, in came the hippopotamuses from the Zambezi River, and it ate all the fruits and vegetables. And now these aid workers, then they went to the villagers and they started talking to the village people. And the village people said that, yes, we know this happens. We knew this is going to happen. And that is why we don't grow anything here. And then the aid workers were like, but then why didn't you tell us? And the farmers said, you didn't ask. You just came and you just started doing your work. We were not involved in this process of development that you thought you were doing it for us. So that was one of the major learnings that, these Italian aid workers had, that you need to include the local population in what you're trying to do for them. And also it should be demand driven. I mean, they need to ask for it that, okay, please kindly help us in having, say, for example, something in agriculture or construct a road or construct a dam or whatever, but it has to be demand driven. So that's why, in South-South cooperation, the principle, the operational principle of demand driven is taken very seriously. Another reason might be that, a lot of southern countries are not very rich when it comes to their financial conditions. So they cannot be just giving away, financial aid to other countries. So it needs to be based on certain demand which comes from the partner countries or the recipient countries. Again, respect for national sovereignty is very important. One thing that it's important to remember is that during the rise of South-South cooperation, or in 1950s and 60s, a lot of countries in Africa and Asia, they had this problem where they did achieve their political independence, but many of their businesses, many of their natural resources and agricultural products that they used to export were still under the control of the companies or the enterprises which were controlled by the global north. So in terms of their natural resources and national sovereignty, it became a sticking point. So again, in South-South cooperation, that found a mention big time. And you are going to see this in the presentation in the later slides as well, that in right to development also this point is very keenly observed. And of course, the political and macroeconomic non-conditionality, because southern countries were suffering from the conditionalities that were imposed on them. So this became one of the very major operational principles. And of course, it started because of the spirit of sharing and solidarity and mutual benefit. So the aspect of demand-driven and mutual benefit are somewhat related to each other, because as I said, many of the countries in the South were not economically well off. So they wanted, certain benefits to come to them as well. Like, for example, if a road is constructed in any country, so those contracts would come back to the country that is providing the financial aid. This, especially this point of mutual benefit, again, has been quite a problematic term, because North-South cooperation also does similar thing. But in South-South cooperation, because of the financial viability of the southern countries themselves, it became an important point that needed to be there in the operational principles of South-South cooperation. Now coming to what is the current state of South-South cooperation. So the South-South cooperation in all these years, all the countries within the global South, they have carried out their developmental activities with their own understanding, with their own, the competitive or the comparative advantages that they had in their countries. So, for example, India for a long time, capacity building was one of the important areas where India contributed in its South-South cooperation. China, as for example, as I gave you the example, infrastructure development was a big cornerstone of Chinese South-South cooperation. Similarly, Brazil has always been good at policy transfers. Similarly, Indonesia and South Africa, Nigeria, Turkey, all these countries have certain specific sectoral specificity which they were good at, and they carried out their South-South cooperation through that way. So South-South cooperation has always been about plurality, about diversity with sectoral specificity, but also, it has been constantly evolving. Like the example of India I gave, that capacity building was always an important aspect of India's South-South cooperation, but over the years, it has grown into the areas of infrastructure development as well. And China is also now moving into the softer versions of South-South cooperation in terms of capacity building programs and other areas. So all these countries involved in South-South cooperation, they're constantly evolving, but they started from certain specific sectors. And then, since the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, even the countries of the North took notice of South-South cooperation, and South-South cooperation became more visible. Still, the quantum of North-South cooperation, it far surpasses what South-South cooperation provides. But then, again, it is quite a good amount of financial resources that are associated with South-South cooperation as well. And then in the SDGs, specifically after 2015, South-South cooperation is considered as an supplementary means of implementation towards achieving the goals, apart from North-South cooperation and triangular cooperation as well. So South-South cooperation is now a unique, innovative, and transformative form of development cooperation, which has found, region-wide acceptance, also from the countries of global North. And if you see the recent QCPR report of 2020, it says that 69% of the program countries in the United Nations at the moment are involved in South-South cooperation. And 63% of them, they carry out peer-to-peer learning with other Southern partners in the area of science, technology, and innovation. And also in the UN development system, there has been mainstreaming of South-South cooperation. So almost all the bodies within the UN system, they have a special division or a special unit within their offices where they are trying to mainstream South-South cooperation, and they're trying to spread the ideas of South-South cooperation, not only within the staff of, the UN staff, but also the way in which they are operationalizing those projects that they're supposed to in different countries of the world. South-South cooperation is an accepted form, a supplementary means of implementation for achieving SDGs. Now, despite these progresses made by South-South cooperation in all these years, there have been, challenges within South-South cooperation as well. There has been limited research towards theorization of South-South cooperation. I mean, again, as I said, because there is so much plurality within South-South cooperation, the diversity in South-South cooperation, I mean, it has been a positive thing on one hand, but on the other hand, it has been a negative in a way that because of so much diversity, there has not been able to have one theorization of South-South cooperation. Like all the countries involved in South-South cooperation, they have viewed it differently. They have operationalized it differently. So a unified approach towards a formation of theory within SSC couldn't really take place. And also there is lack of normative framework in South-South cooperation. So the difference between normative framework and theory is that normative framework is more narrower in focus as compared to theorization. I mean, theorization can be widened, and you can answer various research questions through the theory that you're trying to relate SSC with. But normative framework is more narrower in terms of it tries to come up with standards through which a thing can be evaluated. So there has been almost complete lack of absence of normative framework in South-South cooperation. And then I'll let you know that why is it a problem. Again, now increase in quantum and spread of SSC without normative framework is problematic. SSC getting mainstreamed at UN without normative framework is problematic. I use the word problematic because North-South cooperation in the recent past, it has been seen that it is meandering towards similar problems as were faced in North-South cooperation. For example, infringement of national sovereignty. Now, this example can be seen as to why the Indian government has been against the China-Pakistan economic corridor, because a part of the infrastructure project, or I think it's a road link that goes through the Kashmir part, which is occupied by Pakistan. And India says that it is infringement on the national sovereignty because India's position has been that the entire region of Kashmir is India's part. So any activity happening in that region, it is an infringement of the national sovereignty. So, and that has been one of the major reasons why India did not officially join China's Belt and Road Initiative. Also, the problem of boomerang aid or the operational conditionality. I mean, this is the point of it relates to the point of mutual benefit, as I said in the principles of South-South cooperation. But then now it is coming under a lot of strain because, when South-South cooperation started, as I said, it was much smaller in quantum and spread. But now as it is increasing, it is grabbing eyeballs. It is causing, similar tensions and similar problems as compared to what North-South cooperation had in the past. Also, there is conditionality or in a way disguised conditionality. I mean, again, there are a lot of examples in this as well, a lot of case studies. One of the examples that I can just think of is, I think it was in 2008 and between 2008 and 2010, when South Africa reduced its economic cooperation to Swaziland, which is one of its neighboring countries, because of certain human rights violations that took place. Now, I mean, these things can go either way. At one point, of course, a country should stop financial aid to a country which is not adhering to certain human rights principles. But on the other hand, it can cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of troubles, and a lot of development activities can just stop. It can come to a grinding halt because those financial help stopped. So, I mean, there are a lot of issues. And also, like, I'm sitting in Costa Rica. One of the examples that people always quote here is that in 2006 and 7, when the government of Costa Rica decided to shift its allegiance from Taiwan to People's Republic of China, so China then favored, or they gave a lot of financial aid to Costa Rica for that particular thing. So, I mean, conditionalities are disguised in a lot of South-South cooperation activities as well. And of course, financial and debt unsustainability has become a problem in South-South cooperation. I mean, Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, or getting those airports constructed in cities where those which are the hometowns of the leaders of those countries, which is totally unsustainable. Nobody uses it, so it is just a white elephant in those cases. So these problems have started to come up in South-South cooperation as well. And of course, the allegations of land grabs. So in 2008, 2009, there was an Indian company by the name of Karturi Global, which acquired some land in Ethiopia, and they were growing flowers, which they later wanted to export to Netherlands and other European countries. But then there was this big UN cry that, how this Indian private sector company has, grabbed the land of the local people in Ethiopia. Of course, I mean, that later on it came to light that the land was given by the Ethiopian government to that Indian company. But then again, one needs to be careful with these things because it can spin off in very negative directions. And many a times, it might be true as well. So we don't really know. So proper research needs to be done as to how to make South-South cooperation more sustainable. And so some of these problems where, these issues, South-South cooperation has been grappling now for some time, since the time SSC has increased in its quantum and geographical spread. So that is why, theorization and having a normative framework becomes very important. Now, let me come to right to development. And again, towards the later part of the presentation, you would realize that why right to development is an important normative framework for SSC. So in my previous slides also, I talked a bit about Cold War. So when the Cold War started, the understanding of human rights also got split. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it got split into other things, but the two major things that it got differentiated into was International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights on one hand, and International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights on the other. So, the communist bloc led by the Soviet Union, they adopted or they really tried to force in economic, social and cultural rights in which, education was free, healthcare was free, a lot of other things, it became really easy for the people or the citizens of those countries to have access to. But at the same time, they said that we don't have to do anything in terms of giving you civil and political rights. There won't be a multi-party democracy in those countries. And on the flip side of it, countries, the capitalist bloc led specifically by United States of America, they adhered to this civil and political rights, where they said that there is a multi-party democracy, there is a liberal democracy in those countries. People have the right to choose a particular party which they want to be at the helm. But then, education and health benefits and other things, it all became market driven. I mean, there are inherent, problems in these differentiations as well. But broadly, these were the two categories in which UDHR got split into. And again, during this time in the 1960s and 70s, South was struggling to have a foothold in the international order as well. They soon realized that all these international organizations have been created by a certain group of countries. And most of these countries in 1945, they did not even have, they were not even independent. So by the time they got independence and they got sucked into a system which they did not create, they were not even part of those systems when they were being discussed and deliberated to be formed. So they found that the entire system is against them. But through their struggles, and because by 1960s and 70s, with the decolonization of a lot of southern countries, their numbers increased, at least in the General Assembly. So they were able to achieve some of the things that they wanted, like the new international economic order and the technical cooperation among developing countries, the economic cooperation among developing countries, TCDC. They were able to achieve that in 1960s and 70s. And then in 1964, UNCTAD, that is United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, was established basically to look into the developmental challenges of the global South. The entire group of G77 was formulated in 1964 as well. So these were the little achievements that the southern countries were able to get at the international level. Also, at the same time, the right to development as an idea started to take shape, which primarily viewed development as a right and not as a charity or a privilege to be enjoyed by few. Because the southern countries very quickly realized that North-South cooperation, with its agenda or with its understanding of development, it is not really development, and it is just a neo-colonial tool at the hands of the global North. So a lot of countries in the global South, they started to realize that development has to be seen through the framework of a right and not the charity and privilege. In fact, 1966 was the first time when a Senegalese diplomat at UN General Assembly, he, used the term right to development for the first time and said that development has to be a right. And also then over the years, 80s, 90s, 1980s, 1990s, the idea of development itself, evolved from a narrow understanding of economic growth or a GDP-led growth to a human development understanding of it. I mean, it doesn't say that economic growth or GDP is not important, but then development has to be understood beyond economic growth and beyond GDP numbers. With all these things happening at the global level, in the academic level, at the UN level, at other international organizations level, in came the adoption of Declaration on Right to Development in 1986. But then, imagine the kind of struggle or the kind of slow movement of right to development that took place, that in 1966, it was ideated and it took 20 years for just a declaration to be achieved at General Assembly in 1986. And then again, even through that time, you'll see in later part of the presentation as well, that the pace of the acceptance towards right to development is slow, but then it is coming to fruition in the recent past. And so let me take you through some of the key features of right to development as to what right to development is actually all about. Right to development says that it is an inalienable, self-standing human right. Development and sustainable development are not just mere privileges enjoyed by the human beings, nor are they subject of charity or generosity, as I said from the previous slide as well. The right to development denotes the entitlement of the right holders to three things: to participate in, to contribute to, and to enjoy economic, social, cultural, and political developments. So in a way, right to development is a bridge between those two streams of human rights, economic, social, and cultural rights on one hand, and civil and political rights on the other. Because development as has been understood in the idea of justice, or in the from the perspective of the capabilities approach that Amartya Sen really pushed through and popularized in the 1990s. That development has to be understood as a spectrum which involves economic, social, cultural, civil, and political aspects in it. Even if there is even if one of the things is missing from this understanding of development, you don't really have a sustainable development for yourself or for the country. So that is why all the things are important when one sees development, that is economic, social, cultural, and political rights. And right to development also implies that full realization of rights of people to self-determination. This point is again related to the point of national sovereignty and having full control over the resources of your country. So it started from this point came from that understanding. Operationalizing the right to development involves respecting, protecting, and fulfilling all human rights, that is economic, social, cultural, civil, and political, along with generating resources of growth such as GDP and technology. So in no way it says that economic growth and GDP growth are not important. But again, as I said, the understanding of development is much broader than that, and it should go beyond this understanding of economic and GDP growth. Again, the same point. Again, this means that given the very nature of development as a human right, it cannot be realized when there are violation of other human rights. So you need to achieve all the things in totality for sustainable development to be achieved. The right to development requires focusing not only on the outcome, which are sought to be achieved as a result of development plan, that is the what question, but it should also focus on the process of those outcomes, the how question. So of course, the end goal is important, that you want to achieve development, but the process through which you achieve this development, the ways or the operationalization of those policies and programs to achieve that said goal or that said development is important as well. And this is where right to development brings, again, both the end game, that is the outcome, and the process together. As I said, both the process and outcomes of development must be consistent with and based on all other human rights. In this one, human beings are individually, as all human persons, and collectively, all peoples, are the right holders of the right to development against their states as well as other states. So this simply means that every state or every country is entitled as an agent of all persons and peoples subject to its jurisdiction to demand respect for their right to development by other states and international organizations. Now, in the next slide, this point will become amply clear as to what are the rights and responsibilities of a state when it comes to the realization of right to development. So this understanding of right to development is at three levels. It's a three-pronged approach. The first is that states or countries need to design policies and programs for their own citizens, for their own people, and those programs and policies should be consistent with the realization or towards the realization of right to development. On the second level, those states who are enacting those policies and programs should be aware or should make sure that enactment of those policies and programs, they don't have adverse impact on the peoples of other countries. Say, for a better understanding, you can see this as neighboring countries. So if there are certain programs and policies that Costa Rica is implementing, it shouldn't have adverse impacts on its neighboring countries of Panama and Nicaragua, because people of those countries, they have the right to development from their own government, but at the same time, those policies shouldn't have an adverse impact on other countries. And then the at third level, states need to collectively, at regional and global levels, they need to enact policies or they should negotiate policies which doesn't infringe on the right to development of the people. Now, how this right to development can be integrated or can be seen with SSC, from the perspective of South-South cooperation, the partner country, which is the recipient country, acts as agents and representatives of the right holders. And these right holders are the citizens of the recipient country when it receives cooperation. So this idea of, the partner country and the right holders, it becomes very important South-South cooperation. It would mean that SSC must not undermine or violate the rights of the right holders in order to determine their own developmental priorities. So South-South cooperation, when being seen from a developmental angle, development point of view, it needs to take care of these examples. And it needs to take care of these integrations between right to development and what these countries are trying to achieve in SSC. Thus, SSC must make sure that its primary concern is the enhancement of the well-being of the right holders and not themselves. So if a country is providing cooperation or a financial support or a capacity building initiative to a partner country, that is the recipient country, the primary concern has to be the enhancement of the well-being and not, benefit for themselves. Now, again, there are certain inherent challenges as well. Again, if I can take you back to the principles of the operating principles of South-South cooperation, that mutual benefit is a very important aspect. But then again, yes.
I think that we have lost your presentation. Would you share it again, please?
Oh, sure. Can you see the presentation?
Not yet.
No. Can you see it now?
Yes, but make it in preview. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. The other aspects where the integration of RTD into SSC is that, the state has the obligation to make sure that their SSC initiatives in the recipient country does not impair or nullify the partner country's obligation of realizing right to development. Now, this is the second pronged approach, or the second level of duties and responsibilities of the state. Then later, it is the duty of every state to make sure that their unilateral domestic policies do not have adverse, extraterritorial impacts on right to development of people elsewhere. And on the global level, at the collective front, South-South cooperation must be operationalized at regional and global level to ensure, that right to development is for everyone to enjoy. And, it is not being eliminated because of those policies which have been enacted at the global level. The second is also, the framework of right to development for South-South cooperation would mean that development cooperation initiatives must be compatible with all human rights, and no violation of any human right may be allowed both during the process of cooperation and as a development outcome. So, you need to make sure that, again, as I said, not only the outcome, the output of development, but also the process of development. In all those times, it has to be made sure that human rights are not being violated, because in a way, even if one of the human rights is violated, it would mean that development is not achieved in its totality. So a trade-off between a successful completion of a SSC project and human rights violation goes against the principles of RTD. And again, tools of impact assessment and monitoring and evaluation must be employed to assess whether SSC is promoting or undermining right to development. I mean, at the moment, within SSC, again, there is a raging debate in terms of impact assessment and monitoring and evaluation, because I mean, many countries within the South, they are conducting their SSC projects and activities in other countries. But when it comes to monitoring, evaluation, or their impact assessment, there is not much effort towards these things. But, the discussions have started, and hopefully we'll be able to come to a point where, impact assessment and M&E framework in SSC becomes very important. So, I mean, this will not only assist states for a better and sustainable project delivery, but will also help them in course correction, if steps employed by them are being detrimental towards realization of the right to development. So impact assessment and monitoring and evaluation of the projects are very important, not only just in the developmental outcomes, but also in the process of achieving that development as well. Now, you would think that if there are so many problems within South-South cooperation, then how is it that it is now considered to be an accepted form of development cooperation, and it has found mention in the Agenda 2030 document? I mean, through the presentation, you would have seen that there are certain overlapping principles that are related to right to development in South-South cooperation, which are very close to each other. I mean, this table it really talks about that what are the principles of right to development, and in terms of the guiding principles of South-South cooperation. So there are some overlaps between the two, like people-centered development of right to development and the understanding of solidarity, ownership, or the demand-driven nature of South-South cooperation. So these are some of the some of the ways in which you can see the parallels. And of course, participation, right to development harps a lot on the participation in terms of active, free, meaningful participation of all the individuals and peoples involved. And South-South cooperation has always stood for multi-stakeholder approach, in which peoples, countries, again, demand-driven aspect comes into picture with government, regional organizations, civil society actors, academia, and private sector. It tries to include, voices of all the stakeholders when it tries to enact SSC projects. And again, states as primary duty bearers and different modalities through which South-South cooperation has been taking place in all these years. There are again, some parallels to be drawn from there. Right to development talks a lot about good governance and global partnerships. And as I said in the previous slide, that impact and effectiveness, or the evidence-based, results-oriented approach of South-South cooperation, I mean, those discussions have started, and on a pilot basis, some case studies have also been done in which it has been shown that the projects in South-South cooperation is compatible with the principles that it tries to enlist as the guiding principles of South-South cooperation. So those parallels are there. So also in my research, I'm trying to see, so the case study in my research is the Indian case of South-South cooperation. So first, I'll be trying to see that what are the parallels between India's enactment of SSC projects with the right to development, and how right to development or the normative framework of right to development can be brought in the understanding of India South-South cooperation. And then maybe a future course of action could be that other countries can also start to see right to development in that light as well. So what is the way forward? I mean, what is the current state of right to development? Now, as you would realize that right to development is a very fractious topic when talked about even at the UN level. With my certain interactions with the UN staff at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, they say that right to development has made progress. I mean, till 10 or 15 years ago, right to development was almost not a spoken term. I mean, and again, countries of the North were totally against the idea of right to development, and even countries of the South, they would be talking about right to development in hush-hush voices, but not out in the open. But then over the years, and especially after the adoption of SDGs, things have started to be seen in a very positive way. I mean, in the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, they have a right to development office, which was very small till 10, 15 years ago. But after 2015, it has seen a lot of work that is being done from that office. So some of the examples are that in 2016, they appointed a special rapporteur on right to development, and this took place, after 10 years. I mean, there was a special rapporteur on right to development, but his mandate ended in around 2005. So it took almost 11 years for that position to come up again. And Arjun Sen Gupta used to be the special rapporteur on right to development, and he produced, I think, 4 to 5 reports on right to development. I mean, if you guys are interested, it is really interesting to have a look at those reports. Then there has been a working group that has been formulated at again UNHRC towards formulating legally binding instruments on right to development, and how right to development can be made into a treaty form of agreement, and then countries can deliberate, discuss, and sign on it. So making those, we were talking about rights and responsibilities associated with the right to development. So it needs to be legally bound. So right to development is now moving towards that treaty body or legally binding instrument. And also then expert mechanism group has been instituted to identify and share best practices and promote the implementation of right to development worldwide. And specific case studies, I think, are also being discussed upon as to show how right to development, if adopted by countries, the development cooperation would be much more positive, so as to say. Again, and also the progress of SDGs have been, big time. It has been hampered due to this COVID-19 situation. I mean, if you see the HLPF report of 2019, it says that, the progress of SDGs has been slow. And at that time, this pandemic had not even been thrust upon us. So now with COVID-19, with world economy on the downturn, and, multilateralism under retreat. So with all those challenges, I mean, the world community is pretty sure that SDGs is going to, it's going to be hampered, or it is not going to be achieved the way it was supposed to be by 2030. And so during this time, the issues of rights and responsibilities for peoples and states are becoming much more evident than ever before. And of course, I mean, in terms of means of implementation, we need to move towards this normative framework. And you would realize that the normative framework of right to development doesn't limit itself just to South-South cooperation. It is an overarching thing which, even North-South cooperation or any form of development cooperation would benefit from. So right to development is, as I said, it is seeing some positive developments in recent past. And let's see, I mean, I'm very hopeful, and even because at UN level, discussions on right to development are started to take shape in a very positive way. So I would end my presentation. Yes, thank you. I'm done with it, and I'm open to any questions, queries, feedbacks, whatever, please.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for this enlightenment and insightful presentation. And we have already got positive comments from our participant on the presentation and the deep analysis that you have provided of South-South cooperation and right to development, and all the issues that are related to South-South cooperation. I think that they have already get in-depth analysis of the South-South cooperation. So we'll now open the Q&A section, and we have questions that we are going to pose. So, but please, Mr. Sharma, would you stop sharing your
Sure.
this screen?
Yeah. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's perfect like this.
Thank
So I'm having first a question that my question. I will start by it. So how you are seeing South-South cooperation can support the economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic crisis? So what is what is your thoughts about South-South cooperation importance and the international and regional institutions from the global South? Do you think they are going to have much more importance in the upcoming time? So what is your thoughts regarding this?
I mean, at this time, in the effects of pandemic that we are seeing, not only South-South cooperation, even North-South cooperation, or the traditional understanding of aid, it is going to be affected big time. I mean, remittances have come down. The world, as I said, the world economy is going down. So around 140 or close to $150 billion that was associated with the DAX budget was around that much. So it is going to be reduced for sure, no doubt about it. And along with it, because southern countries are part of the global value chain as well, so they are going to be affected economically as well. So yes, it is a challenge, but again, in terms of the principles through which SSC, at least on paper, has been enacted, I think if those rights and responsibilities are really adhered to, in whatever way the developmental activities are taking place within SSC, it is going to be sustainable, and it is not going to be, the promises are not going to be hollow, I would say. But it is a challenging times, no doubt about it.
So please, I'm asking the participant to write their question in the chat box. Meanwhile, I'm having another question regarding South-South cooperation and soft power. So we know about China intervention in Africa. So it is one sort of South-South cooperation. But if we are analyzing this from the other side, we can tell that this is a sort of South-South cooperation, a new colonization. So what do you think about this and China intervention in some of Asian countries and especially in Africa, because it is much more having connections and relationship with African countries?
I mean, also it needs to be seen, again, if you look at research, there are on one hand, the involvement of or the increase of South-South cooperation by China, specifically the Belt Road initiatives, and even before that, the presence of Chinese developmental activities in all over the globe, it has been quite a lot. And researchers like Deborah Brottingham or Eric Olander, if you see their research, they say that all these allegations against China, it is not a serious problem, because some of the challenges that these countries are facing because of China's involvement, it used to be much more when those traditional northern countries were present in many of these many of these African countries. So in a way, comparatively, if you see, according to these researchers, I have not specifically looked at China's, that is not my research, but through their research, I can tell you that they say that it is not much of an issue, not much of a problem. And on the other hand, if you read, the book Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo, she even wants to invite more of Chinese enterprises and more of China's involvement in African countries, because according to her research and according to what she says, that the world needs, she uses this term benevolent dictator. People can look at from all different ways that what does it mean? Dictator itself is a bad, but then she added the word the benevolent dictator. So all these things are on, and many of those challenges I alluded to in my presentation as well. South-South cooperation started from this a very benevolent and very nice idea of solidarity-driven development. But over the years, because of a rise in quantum of South-South cooperation, and basically with the countries like India, China, the major countries, which are providing South-South cooperation to the world. So these problems have come up as well. And that is why I feel that normative framework for SSC is important. Because if not, as I said in my presentation as well, many of these South-South cooperation activities are going towards that, the problems which countries face because of North-South cooperation.
We do have a question also regarding China. So Yashvi is saying, isn't China violating the principles of right to development? How can it be held accountable for its actions? What do you think about this? There is, I tell you another question, and you like question by question. Another question is from Andrisha. She is asking, as student of international relations of Indo-Pacific studies, her question is whether bilateral cooperation and development aid qualify as South-South cooperation.
Okay, so on the question of China, see, I mean, China is a big country, a big behemoth when it comes to South-South cooperation, and its activities, of course, it has attracted a lot of negative press, a lot of negative attention, specifically in Africa, but in other places as well. But again, in terms of research, I mean, media reports, newspaper reports are one thing, but you need to have to do some proper research. And even in research, I mean, there have been things, research which are detrimental to what China is doing in many parts of the world. But again, if we specifically see it from the principles of right to development, then not only China, but many countries in the world are violating those principles of right to development. But again, it is not accountable at the moment, because right to development in itself is not a legally binding instrument. It is just a declaratory thing that we have been able to achieve till now. So hopefully when, it becomes a treaty body, then, more things, and then of course, and then more research also needs to be done in terms of monitoring, evaluation, and impact assessment of China's South-South cooperation activities in other places. So, I mean, at the moment, nobody has a definite answer, but it needs to be seen in the wider framework of right to development. And what was the second question? Can you please repeat?
Yes, the second question is whether bilateral cooperation and development aid can be qualified as South-South cooperation, and she's saying that her question is in respect of to India engaging with South Asia, East Asian nations. So she's asking, is bilateral cooperation, development aid can be qualified as South-South cooperation?
Yes, in fact,
it's only regional. So we fight to her, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In fact, if you see like South-South cooperation, it has always been led government to government. So, I mean, bilateral initiatives, bilateral treaty signing agreements are very much part of South-South cooperation. In fact, South-South cooperation originated from these bilateral initiatives. I mean, now there are regional initiatives and multilateral initiatives in SSC. But of course, I mean, in origin, South-South cooperation has always been bilateral, and it has always been government to government. I won't be able to answer specifically of India's engagement with the Southeast Asia, because I have not looked at that region specifically. But again, I would assume that India's bilateral initiatives, like lines of credits that India has given in terms of capacity buildings or the grants, it follows the principles of the operating principles of South-South cooperation.
We have two more questions, and we have two hands are raised for intervention. So let's take questions first. Hussein is saying, is it possible to achieve development and human rights in light of violence based on race and gender?
Of course, I mean, if you see, this is where right to development comes in which it says that, I mean, the differentiation of the human rights bodies that I talked about. So right to development brings those those together. I mean, so of course, and if you see development from the angle of from the perspective of right to development, or the capabilities approach, or the idea of justice, any infringement on human rights would lead to unfulfilled promises of development. So development has to be an all-encompassing concept. So of course, based on not only race or religion, but someone's sexual orientation, someone's political ideologies. So any infringement based on these things is an infringement on or you cannot achieve development to a full scale if any of these human rights is violated.
Ashima is asking about human rights. Are human rights same for everyone? And she's thinking about how can developed countries are dictating policies and norms for human rights for developing countries, and she's giving that example of how can developed countries come up with a policy solution for the refugee people in other countries.
I mean, see, human rights in itself, it has to be seen in different ways, or in terms of its origin. I mean, if you see like human rights, which is associated with slavery, I mean, if you talk about slavery, nobody can say that southern countries are for slavery or against slavery, or northern countries are for or against slavery. I mean, these are customary laws. These are customary human rights, which nobody can have a different viewpoint on. But when it comes to other things, a lot of the present things. So of course, I mean, human rights is a very a topic that divides the world. Not only the world within. I mean, in India, I mean, it can be a very problematic term as well. I mean, a few years ago, I was reading a research in which there was some statements being made which said that China is trying to have a different understanding of human rights. In India, in recent past, some of the political leaders have said that the Western understanding of human rights doesn't apply to India. So, of course, with that liberal democracy being under stress, or multilateralism under stress, we are seeing that human rights is being very divisional topic. So yeah, I mean, there is a problem. It has to be seen, and I would say that after the COVID-19 situation is taken care of, all the people, all the world leaders and international organizations, maybe at UN level, they need to convene a session in which they need to discuss and deliberate upon multilateralism and good governance, and they need to have some common understanding of it. Because I mean, just look at from the flip side. I mean, in terms of look at the counter narratives or the counterfactuals. What if we don't have these systems, or these systems are going down further? I mean, the whole Second World War was started because of those inward-looking policies. I mean, trade was almost at countries were not trading with each other. The rules-based order, it collapsed, and look where it got us. I mean, and that is why these institutions came up. But also at the same time, reforms of these international organizations and international norms are important, because in 2020 we cannot be living in a world with the institutions that were set up in 1945. Of course, reforms has to take place, but then again, you cannot end those systems. You need to reform it. So those discussions are very important.
We have three hands that are raised. I think that they need to ask questions. So the first one, it was Dr. Kamal. So you have a question that you would like to impose, Dr. Kamal?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I am Dr. Kamal from Pakistan. Actually, first of all, I am thankful to the presenter for sparing your precious time. Indeed, it was a very comprehensive presentation. Actually, my question is about the different module of the South-South cooperation. I mean, if you see the Japan or South Korea, the model is very different from the China and India. Japan and Korea, they heavily rely on the mutual cooperation based on the knowledge and learning and mutual benefits. While on the other hand, if you see the China and India, particularly if we consider the South Asian region, it's heavily rely on the political relationship and diplomatic relationship like this. So my question is that what is the, keeping in view these facts, what is the future of South Asia in the South-South cooperation back, if we consider the SSC background, what is the future of South Asia? And another question is, a short question is, that Pakistan is heavily rely with the relationship with China, I mean in trade and investment and everything. How much this one, the rely on the one country, such sort of relationship, how much it is dangerous for Pakistan, whether Pakistan should diversify its relationship in terms of the SSC, or what is your opinion?
Okay, so for the first question, of course, see, as I said, as I alluded to in my presentation as well, that plurality and diversity has been a bedrock of South-South cooperation in all these years. I mean, every country has done it differently. I mean, you gave the example of South Korea and Japan. So they have done it differently. India, China has done it differently. All countries which have been involved in SSC, they have done it differently. And you have to realize that why have they done it differently? I mean, they have done it differently because all these countries had certain comparative advantages as compared to other countries, which they thought that we are good at, and we can assist, we can help on those principles of South-South cooperation to other developing countries. So that has always been seen in a very positive light when it comes to SSC. And also the problems associated with such diversities, I talked about that in my presentation as well, that it didn't allow a normative framework or a sound theoretical framework to develop. Also, SSC over the years, it has been seen from different different disciplines as well. Economists have looked at South-South cooperation differently. International relations experts have looked at differently. Even within international relations, there has been a realist lens, there has been a liberal lens, there has been a constructivist lens to South-South cooperation. Like for my research, I am looking at SSC more from a constructivist lens than from a realist lens. So if you look at South-South cooperation from a realist lens, so all the problems that are associated with South-South cooperation, for them, that won't be a problem because realism trumps everything else. You need to have foreign policy needs to be linked with realism. But then again, if you see from the development studies point of view or from the sociological point of view, I mean, researchers and professors from those disciplines have also looked at SSC very differently. So these are some of the problems that are associated with SSC. And in terms of the question on Pakistan, I mean, it is a common thing, an age-long adage goes that, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So of course, I mean, diversification is the way forward, and everyone should try to achieve that. And yes, politics has trumped, specifically if we see the SAARC region. I mean, there have been constant tensions between India and Pakistan from the political side, from the diplomatic side. But then again, there have been certain positive steps taken at the SAARC as well. I remember SAARC satellite, which was launched recently, or also when it came to COVID, the situation of COVID-19, a SAARC fund was created, and in that, even Pakistan is very much involved in that idea of SAARC fund for COVID-19. So yes, I mean, there are dimensions to South-South cooperation. You can look at from a very political angle, from a very political view, and then you can look at from a developmental angle as well. But what trumps what? I mean, it is anybody's guess. But we need to move in the direction in which development is seen more in that right to development framework, I would say.
Another question is from Dr. Firdaus Malik. Do you have a question you want to ask?
Yes, good evening all. I am very thankful for the presenter. It was actually indeed a very nice presentation, and the way he has, put light, and the way the presenter has put light on, the issues of development, and he has talked about it is a spectrum, and has quoted one of our Nobel laureate from, Calcutta, Professor Amrita Sen. So I have certain, pointers, very important pointers with regard to India, as most focus was that human rights violation, and we are having organizations at the world level who are looking at it. So if we talk about human rights violation, particularly in India, the violations
Can you speak a little louder? I can't hear you.
yeah, my point is that in India we are having lot of human rights violation from time to time. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
So the current point is the current violations are because of this COVID-19 global, this pandemic. We have deaths, we have deaths on the roads, particularly migration and poor laborers. This is one, because we are having economic challenges. Lot of our population is very poor. Besides this, we are having increasing political motivated issues or violations. As I belong to Kashmir, we are having human rights violation from times, and since in last 1 year we are having so many violations. So my question is, there is supervision of human rights violation, and we have at world level organizations, they are looking at it, they are drafting, we are seeing reporters, newses, researchers, and people are speaking about it. Great professors like Amrita Sen and intellectuals across the globe, they are talking about it, but still it is increasing. So I think the role of these human rights organizations, it is just in the framework of, they are just documenting, there is not solutions to it, and it is happening across the world. We are not finding concrete solutions how to overcome such problems. So what is your view on this? How successful is human rights violation? Should we need certain changes to set up these violations, and what is the future of this? Because as a Kashmiri, we don't believe, we think that it is a paper organization. They are announcing on Twitter there is violation, they are condemning. So what is your viewpoint on it? Thank you, sir.
See, I mean, it is a very, of course, a prevalent problem and a wide-ranging problem, and not only in terms of human rights. I mean, United Nations has been condemned that it is a talking shop or a paper-thin organization which doesn't it doesn't have teeth. So those things are at one level are important as well. But then just imagine if in absence of human rights, or in absence of United Nations organization or Human Rights Council, or all those human rights bodies. I mean, even if there is no condemnation, as you said, that of these things happening, at least in international law you can have that have that report or have that piece of paper to say that, okay, the world recognizes that certain things, certain human rights violations have taken place at our level, or in our region. And then you can take that to pressurize the government, not only in India but anywhere wherever those human rights violations are taking place. I mean, Israel Palestine is another major region where Palestine and its allies keep on saying that there has been a violation of international law in terms of where Israel is trying to increase or trying to grab the lands of Palestine, and those illegal settlements are taking place. So of course, I mean, see, Professor, you need to understand that human rights, all these things, they take place at different levels. I mean, of course, researchers or professors, they are going to condemn it, they are going to say things, but then there are a lot of civil society organizations and a lot of political organizations on the ground who take those things and build upon it, and then try to pressurize the government for a course correction. So all these things are important. You cannot pick and choose. You cannot say that what researchers or what professors or what these organizations are doing, it doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense, but then it needs to be seen at different, what do you say, at different angles, at different understandings. And all these protest movements, I mean, like Black Lives Matter in US is a big thing, and also in a lot of other European countries as well. I mean, these protests are important. It is good in any democratic society. It must happen. It should take place. But then sometimes I believe, I mean, I was having this discussion with my guide, and he was of the opinion that these protests should be more strategic in nature. You know, again, if you see it from a right to development perspective, as I said, don't hit upon that, okay, maybe this is a religious persecution or this is a racial persecution. I mean, if we are able to say that because of those things, we are not able to develop, or those developmental imperatives are infringed upon because of these things, maybe, so I think that communication needs to be changed as well. It needs to keep improving or keep evolving with changing times. I mean, again, human rights per se is not my research area, but this is just some of my views that I have, I can say.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for Dr. Firdaus for your question as well, and Dr. Kamal previously. Now we are having one more hand that is raised, is from Haryana. You have a question, Haryana, you want to impose?
Yes, Professor, I have a question. So, hi, Mr. Sharma. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. That was good. It was a really informative presentation. So, my question is, China has a different operative norms and definitions for South-South cooperation, right? So, and that's quite different from the general South-South cooperation definition. But with rise of COVID, so has it been gained acceptance from the countries? I mean, as if the recipient countries in terms of aid, whoever, have they, has the definition has been gained acceptance, or else is it a marriage of convenience where the recipient country is undertaking a pragmatic approach so that they can benefit rather than accepting so and so definition? So that's there. That's one question. The second question is, there is also, COVID, there's a rise of South-North cooperation rather than North-South cooperation. So has it been a gradual process, or is it due to through sudden onset of COVID? And what is the outlook for the future? How does it go? Like, is it going to stay, or is it going to take a different approach? So these are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Hariharan. So on the first question, no, I don't think so that China has a different definition for South-South cooperation. Even if you look at their operating principles of SSC, the Chinese SSC, it is exactly the things that I mentioned, in my presentation. So they're not having a different definition or different understanding of South-South cooperation. But yes, certain projects that they have done on the ground in different countries, that has led to a understanding from other researchers and other observers that maybe they are trying to move away from these guiding principles of South-South cooperation. So that is why more of research and more of inherently looking at South-South cooperation is important in terms of its principles. And again, I mean, if you get consumed by just the newspaper reports or these things, I mean, if you're a researcher, you have to go beyond it. I mean, you always have to question that whatever you are being said or you are being shown, is it really the case? This is where researchers or academicians' position comes up. So always try to look beyond what is being said and what is being told. So in terms of, I mean, again, as I said, China is not my research area, but in terms of, I would say that in course of time in future, when India's South-South cooperation initiatives also, grow much bigger in size than what it is present, similar things would be said to India as well. So that is why those rights, responsibilities, and seeing SSC from the understanding of right to development is important. I mean, I'm in a university where students from US, China, like all over the world, students are present. And we have such interesting discussions here. So till few years ago, the students from US used to say that, oh, in the class, we always feel that we are being attacked by all other students because maybe the actions of the US government has been detrimental to the world. And that thing has now shifted to a lot of Chinese students. So Chinese students, they feel that they are being victimized in the class, or a lot of questions are being asked to them. So, and if South-South cooperation also continues in the same manner, maybe in future, Indian students in those universities, in foreign universities, have to face those questions. So that is why, this normative framework for development or for any international cooperation is important, and it should be based on those things. And sorry, I forgot, what was your second question on?
My second question was on South-North cooperation.
So yes, exactly. I mean, there have been examples where Cuban doctors have gone to Italy and, they have assisted in the healthcare facilities in Italy. So, and recently, I mean, it is questionable. I mean, I don't know where does Russia stand. I mean, Russia is part of BRICS, but it has been a former superpower as well. But there have been some projects that were signed between India and Russia where I think the eastern part of Russia, there are some developmental activities that India is going to undertake. So that can be seen as a South-North cooperation as well. And there has been triangular cooperation all this while, where one major, northern country, along with a middle-income southern country, carries out a project in a developing country, say in South Asia or Africa or anywhere. And India has been partnering in some of those triangular cooperation as well. So these things have always been there, and COVID-19 has been a game changer. I mean, who would have thought that Doctors Without Borders, which is an organization, kind of an international organization, I mean, they had to intervene in mainland US to save the Navajo people, the indigenous people in the US. So I mean, COVID-19 is a game changer, and a lot of traditional understandings of international relations is going to be dismantled because of COVID-19. I mean, in research, we have always studied about presence of South in the North and presence of North in the South. I mean, this is very much being clearly observed in this COVID-19 situation. I mean, just look at US. I mean, the African American population are disproportionately more affected by COVID-19 as compared to races of, other races in US. Similar has been the case in UK and in other places. In India, you see, I mean, Firdaus just asked a question that, the unprivileged people in India are getting affected disproportionately more as compared to the privileged ones, even in India. So I mean, all those things, it is coming out in stark contrast, and it is very much out there in the open to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arihan, for your question. So we are having short time now, so I will have only one. I will take one questions from the written questions to ask. So we have that question of Varsha. She is asking if we begin to recognize the disparity and differences in perception of human rights and its value across the globe, does this not weaken and makes the international human rights sphere counterproductive, wherein its purpose to reinforce the sense of universality?
See, of course, human rights were always meant to be universal in nature. That is why it was Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what UN proposed. And for a long time, of course, those human rights were universal in nature. And I think still, I mean, not to be too pessimistic, I think it is still human rights is considered to be universal in nature. I mean, politics does play a big role in this. I mean, when people say that, this is the Western understanding or the Northern understanding of human rights. But I think even those people in their heart of hearts, they think that, okay, these violations, they are human rights violations. I mean, people dying on the street, people not having food to eat, or any kind of violation based on any sorts of the schism or the differentiations that we have in this world. It is a human rights violation. Politically, it might not suit certain countries or certain leaders to say that, okay, these are the Western understanding of human rights. But no, I mean, if you ask me, human rights are universal. But again, as I said, in multilateralism, in global governance, reforms have to take place. And if, a case can be made, a very, strong case can be made for that, okay, there may be a differentiation between Western understanding of human rights or a Southern understanding of human rights. I mean, it needs to be discussed. If there is a difference in understanding, in difference point of view, I think it needs to be discussed. That platform should be open for discussion of those things.
Okay, so now it is 9:30. We are reaching the end of this session, and our participants, they have asked lots of questions today. So it means they have really been involved with your presentation, and that's why they have opened lots of thoughts to them and to ask. So before ending this session, I really would like to thank you, Mr. Sharma, for accepting our invitation and for giving such a thought-provoking session and presentation. So by the name of Jindal Center of Global South, I would like to give you really a special vote of thanks for your time and for accepting to join us at that earlier time in Costa Rica. So it is at 8 a.m. So thank you so much, and thank you for all our participants for joining us. And we really, I have personally enjoyed your presentation and the discussions that we have. And we look forward for future collaboration between us and with you, Professor Sharma. And I hope that soon we are going to congratulate you for your PhDs. Thank you so much.
I hope so too. I mean, thank you, Professor. And I didn't mention this. I mean, I have been a student at Jindal as well. So I was at JSIA from 2012 to 2014. And I have some very good memories of the university. So thank you, Professor, for giving me this opportunity to present my research.
Thank you so much. It is our honor.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.